Well, good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page. It is Tuesday morning, April 4th, 2023. Hope everybody's doing well today. Got several folks joining on the stream. And I'm just looking at my phone here. My computer is acting a little weird. Normally the monitor to my left is showing me, I can see what's going on. Well, I can't see what's going on. So I'm having to look at my phone to see what's going on. I don't know what the problem is, but anyway, Sheila, Gail, Lyle, Janie, Dawn. Good to see all of you folks and others joining on. We're cross-posted onto the Near Churches page as well. And of course, that doesn't matter to me because I can't see what's going on there either. So, anyway, didn't do any live streams last week. I was in Memphis and then had planned on starting back yesterday. But was not able to do that. Had some work going on in the building and too much noise, people in and out. So here we are today. And we're ready for the book of 2 Kings. Remember, we're just doing an overview of the kings we're dealing right now with northern Israel. We will eventually get to southern Israel. And as you look through 1st and 2nd Kings, you have both kingdoms mentioned, both the northern and southern. You get over to 2nd Chronicles, and it focuses only on southern Israel, so those are good things to know. Southern Israel as in Judah. But so I've got up on the screen here what we've looked at so far in our studies. We've looked at 7 kings so far, all the way through King Ahab. And today we're going to start with Ahaziah. And again, this opens the book of 2 Kings. 2 Kings chapter 1. He is mentioned at the end of 1 Kings as we learn about the death of Ahab. Of course, Ahab is a very wicked king. His wife Jezebel is still alive. She will meet her end here in a few chapters, and we may get to that today. But Ahaziah is covered in 1 Kings 22 through 2 Kings chapter 1. Don't know a great deal about him. He's the 8th king of Israel. Reigns for 2 years. And his summary here is actually at the end of 1 Kings chapter 22. And so I want to look at that just quickly because, again, this is a pretty general summary of the kings of northern Israel. And so let me do something here real quick. All right, so 1 Kings chapter 22, just begin in verse 51. It says, Ahaziah the son of Ahab became king over Israel and Samaria in the 17th year of Jeroboam, king of Judah, and reigned 2 years over Israel. He did evil in the sight of the Lord and walked in the way of his father and in the way of his mother and in the way of Jeroboam the son of Nebat. So obviously his mother and his father, Ahab and Jezebel, not the best, but also is included here is the wickedness of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, which is of course the first king of northern Israel, who made Israel to sin. Verse 53, for he served Baal and worshipped him and provoked the Lord God of Israel to anger according to all that his father had done. So just a continuation of wickedness, and that again is going to be the pattern throughout these kings. So let me do something just real quick. Give me just a second, and I will get back to Ahaziah. All right. One of the interesting things about this king, about, again, the 8th king of northern Israel, is that he introduces us to this biblical, I don't know if you say biblical character, but we're introduced to Beelzebub. As you turn to 2 Kings chapter 1, one of the things that we learn is that Ahaziah is injured by accident in his house. He falls from an upper story, injures himself, and, well, as you begin reading down in that text, specifically verse 2, his request is, go. Now this is kind of, well, perplexing, amazing. I don't know exactly what word to use here, but he gets injured at home, and this is his message. Go inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, whether I shall recover from this injury. Okay, so this is a king of Israel. This is a king of God's people. And his first source of inquiry is a Philistine god. And we don't know much about Beelzebub from the biblical text. The New Testament, starting in Matthew chapter 12, we read about him, and he's known as Beelzebub. And I put that up here, Matthew 12, verses 22 through 30. Of course, Mark also records that in his gospel account in Mark chapter 3, where Jesus is casting out demons. And the accusation is he's casting out demons by Beelzebub, the prince of demons. And so we're introduced to this god, this foreign god, false pagan god, in 2 Kings chapter 1, because a king of God's people, Israel, seeks, I guess you'd say, seeks information. Am I going to recover from my injury? So throughout 2 Kings chapter 1, let's see here, verses 2 and 3, verse 6, and then again in verse 16, this god of Ekron, again a Philistine god, is referenced in connection with this king's injury. So that just shows you the level of depravity that the kings of northern Israel have reached, that they are seeking counsel, that they are seeking, well, here I guess you could say technically medical advice from a foreign god. This word, Beelzebub, depending, if you're reading it in the Old Testament or the New, is, the name means Lord of Flies or God of Flies. And doing the digging that I did is, most people believe that is like a term of derision. It's like the Israelites renamed this Philistine god to essentially degrade him. One of the definitions is Lord of Dung, God of manure, basically. And so, well, what does manure attract? Flies. So that's one of the beliefs behind this. But again, when you get to Matthew chapter 12 and Mark chapter 3, when Jesus is casting out demons, he's accused of doing so by the power of the prince of the demons, Beelzebub. So obviously throughout its history, Sheila says God is truly a patient God. There's no question about that. But one of the things we're going to read, Sheila, is as these kings of northern Israel progress, God starts to take action. I mean, he has already to some extent, you might say, but God's action against northern Israel becomes more aggressive, more prominent, let's say, as things continue to get worse. Anyway, we're introduced to that God here, and again, he's referenced as the God of Ekron in verse 2. Well, every time he's mentioned, he's referenced as the God of Ekron. So that's the summary of this king. Again, the son of Ahab and Jezebel. He continues in their sins. He continues in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which ultimately, of course, is a reference to those golden calves that were set up in Dan and Bethel when the kingdom initially split. So nothing new with King Ahaziah, Israel's 8th king. Anyway, he dies from his injuries. That's the rest of 2 Kings chapter 1. And 2 Kings chapter 2, we're going to kind of skip over that. That is, Elijah has been the prophet of Israel. This is where Elijah is caught up and taken to heaven, and Elisha, his servant, takes his place. And so throughout these kings, as if you sit down and read the biblical text, again, we're just highlighting the kings themselves and their activities, you will read, and I've mentioned this a few times, like Micaiah, back in 1 Kings chapter 21, who dealt with Ahab. You've got Elijah, you've got Elisha, and various men of God who are mentioned, sometimes by name, sometimes not by name. But 2 Kings chapter 2 talks about that transition from the time of Elijah, now the prophet Elisha, talks about some of his miracles. And then we get to chapter 3, 2 Kings chapter 3. Now we're told about this king Joram or Jehoram, who is Israel's 9th king, who's going to reign for 12 years. And this is, you're going to start noticing some of these kings, like this guy, has 2 or 3 different names, Joram/Jehoram. So I'll put those things up there so you can identify. And again, I mentioned this, I think this was in the last video when we were together, that it can get confusing because some of the kings of Israel and Judah, they have the same name, but they reign at different times. So we'll try to keep all that straight as we go through here. Well, obviously, this is Ahab's son, but it's Ahaziah's brother. Ahaziah, he died of that injury, that fall. He didn't have any children. And so his brother, Ahab's son, Joram/Jehoram, becomes king of Israel. And this is interesting as you're reading the text here. He is evil, okay? There's not one fully good king in northern Israel for their 280, 290 years of history. But a very few of them do have some good things that they do. But anyway, 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 1 beginning, says, Now Jehoram the son of Ahab became king over Israel and Samaria in the 18th year of Jehoshaphat king of Judah, and reigned 12 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord. But then it says this, but not like his father and mother, Ahab and Jezebel, obviously. For he put away the sacred pillar of Baal that his father had made, nevertheless. So that's not a bad thing, okay, that he would do that. Nevertheless, he persisted in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who had made Israel sin. He did not depart from them. And again, that would be a reference ultimately to the idol worship that has overtaken northern Israel because of what Jeroboam the son of Nebat did in the beginning of the kingdom. Now, as we look at his life, again, he reigns for 12 years. There's constant battle. Something that continually goes on. He's fighting against Moab. Well, the Moabites, if you remember all the way back in the book of Genesis chapter 19, is a product, well, he's a son of Lot by one of his daughters. The Moabites and the Ammonites came from Lot's daughters and their sinful activity there. So Israel allies with Judah and Edom to defeat the Moabites. Well, the Moabites, if you look here in 2 Kings chapter, where is it? Well, back in 2 Kings chapter 1, the very first verse of the book, it says, Moab rebelled against Israel after the death of Ahab. And you have to go back a little bit. You can go to 1 Chronicles chapter 18. It was during the reign of David that the Moabites were, you might say, put under tribute. While David was king. Here in 2 Kings chapter 3, verses 4 and 5, it talks a little bit more about that. Mesha, the king of Moab, was a sheep breeder, and he regularly paid the king of Israel 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. Well, Ahab dies, and he says, okay, we're not doing this anymore. And so now you have Israel, Judah, and Edom, the Edomites, which that's the descendants of Esau, going back to, what is that, Genesis 35:18, I think, or something like that. Maybe it's Genesis 38:5, but Edom is Esau. That's those descendants. It's just good to know those connections, the Edomites, the Moabites, where they came from. So Moab rebelled against the kingdom of Israel, 2 Kings chapter 3 and verse 5. And so, and this is interesting because at this point in time, Jehoshaphat is still king in Judah. Well, he had dealt with Ahab in the past, and Ahab had sought advice from his prophets. And one of the things that Jehoshaphat said was, well, isn't there Isn't there a prophet of the Lord that we can talk to? That goes back to 1 Kings chapter 22. Well, here, the same thing happens years later, and we're in the same lineage. We're still in the family of Ahab of northern Israel. Jehoshaphat is still king in Judah. So, let's see. It really begins in 2 Kings chapter 3 and verse 6. Jehoram went out of Samaria at that time and mustered all Israel. He went and sent to Jehoshaphat. And Jehoshaphat agrees. Listen, I'll go up with you. We'll fight against this, I guess you'd say, a common enemy. The king of Israel went up with the king of Judah and the king of Edom, verse 9. And they're going to fight. But look at 2 Kings chapter 3 and verse 11. Jehoshaphat said, "Is there no prophet of the Lord here, that we may inquire of the Lord by him?" That's exactly what he said to, what would this be? Joram's grandfather, Ahab. Again, if you make notes in the margin of your Bible, right down there next to 2 Kings 3:11, 1 Kings 22:7. Well, that was Micaiah that Ahab hated because he wouldn't prophesy good things for him. And, well, notice what happens here. They get Elisha. Verse 11, Elisha. Verse 12, Jehoshaphat acknowledges the word of the Lord is with him. And Judah, okay, southern Israel is still, they have good kings. Jehoshaphat is one of those good kings, and they are being preserved providentially by God because of the promises that God had made to David about David's throne and, of course, ultimately the Messiah coming through Judah. But he's allied himself with Israel. You can't get much worse with them than with them. And the Edomites, who have been enemies of Israel and Judah. So you get down to 2 Kings chapter 3 and verse 14, and it says, Elisha said, "As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, surely were it not that I regard the presence of Jehoshaphat king of Judah, I would not look at you nor see you. But now bring me a musician." And so there's that acknowledgement, as we're learning about the kings of Israel, that Judah is still following the Lord. They have good kings. And the only reason Elisha will prophesy for Jehoram, this evil king of Israel, is because Jehoshaphat's there. So that's kind of interesting to me. You know, makes you think a little bit, or it should make you think a little bit about who your acquaintances are, and can they bring you closer to God? That's something that should be thought about. And that's exactly what we see happening here. So, you read the rest of 2 Kings chapter 3, and the alliance of Israel, Judah, and Edom ends up defeating the Moabites and putting them, I guess you'd say, putting them in subjection. He fights with the Syrians, 2 Kings chapter 6 through 8, talking about Jehoram still. And he's only mentioned throughout those chapters as the king of Israel, and he's only mentioned a few times. Again, we're kind of skipping over some chapters. One very well-known chapter here is 2 Kings chapter 4, with several of Elisha's, and this is very similar to what the text does with Elijah, several of his miracles recorded. 2 Kings chapter 5, we have the account of the Syrian army's commander, Naaman, being healed. But then you get to 2 Kings chapter 6, 7, and 8, and the focus gets back on Jehoram. And again, he's repeatedly referred to as just the king of Israel throughout those three chapters. And there's not, frankly, there's not, to me, a whole lot of comment to be made about the king of Israel in those chapters. It's just recording it's just a historical narrative, everything that's going on. As you get to the end of 2 Kings chapter 8, we get a little information about Judah, about southern Israel, about the transition of kings there. And then you get to 2 Kings chapter 9, and that's interesting because at the end of 2 Kings chapter 8, Joram is injured in battle. He's going to end up dying from that. But in that process, Jehu, who kills him, he's injured in battle, and then he goes out to meet Jehu, and he's killed. But as all of that's going on, this man by the name of Jehu kills him, and is anointed as king of Israel by Elisha, by the way, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute. And Jehu is anointed king for a very specific purpose. Now, again, he is not a great individual, but he does some things that are good. So, as you get to 2 Kings chapter 9, Jehu's anointed king over Israel, and you start reading in verse 14, Jehu kills Joram, okay, the guy he's going to succeed. He kills, he's involved, you might say, in the death of Jezebel at the end of 2 Kings chapter 9. 2 Kings chapter 10 talks about Jehu killing the house of Ahab, and all of this is the fulfillment of prophecy. I mean, Ahab was told this stuff would happen while he was still alive. So Jehu becomes northern Israel's 10th king. He reigns for 28 years, anointed by Elisha. And that's interesting to me too, because you start reading here in 2 Kings chapter 9, and Elisha calls one of the sons of the prophets and tells him to take a flask of oil and go anoint Jehu. Make him rise from among his associates and anoint him as king. But notice in 2 Kings chapter 9 and verse 3, thus says the Lord, I have anointed you king over Israel. So you have all of this idolatry and apostasy from God, and yet God identifies Israel, I guess you could say technically still as his people. Now things are going to start going downhill here. Specifically, we read about that in chapter 10, but Israel is still his people. And he anoints this king, Jehu, to do some very specific tasks. So that's in 2 Kings chapter 9. I want you to notice that, verses 7 through 10. Listen to this. I've anointed you king over the people of the Lord over Israel. You shall strike. Here's the reason he's appointed. You shall strike down the house of Ahab your master, that I may avenge the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord at the hand of Jezebel. You remember that in the days of Ahab and Jezebel, they even had to hide hide prophets, because Jezebel is just slaughtering them. And God said, we're going to essentially rectify this situation. There's going to be a judgment that comes upon the house of of Ahab, and Jehu's the one who's going to do that. And he does some good things. Okay, so you get down to, obviously, initiating, completing the judgment against the house of Ahab. That's a good thing, because that's just a wicked nation. But then you get to family, rather. You get to 2 Kings chapter 10, verses 29 to 31. Listen to this. Jehu did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who had made Israel to sin, that is, from the golden calves that were at Bethel and Dan. So while he's doing the task for which God had appointed him, he's still an idolater. That continues. And the Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in doing what is right in my sight, and have done to the house of Ahab all that was in my heart, your sons shall sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation. Now that carries you all the way through to 2 Kings chapter 15 with that promise. But listen to this, 2 Kings 10:31. But Jehu took no heed to walk in the law of the Lord God of Israel with all his heart. And you think about that, and God has openly communicated with him, has anointed him through the hands of Elisha and one of the other prophets, and yet he still took no heed to walk in the law of the Lord. For he did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, who had made Israel to sin. And then you get to verse 32, 2 Kings 10:32, and this was what I was mentioning. In those days the Lord began to cut off parts of Israel. And he's been saying that this is going to happen, that he's going to bring judgment against his people. Well, it's in the days of Jehu that you see this starting to happen. And even though Jehu is doing what God had appointed him to do, Israel's being judged because of her wickedness. So, well, that's what we've got. That's where I want to stop. And I don't know exactly how the live stream has gone. I can't see anything on my screen. My phone is acting goofy. Now we've had problems with Verizon in this area. There was a tower, actually 2 towers down, and we didn't have a phone signal from like Friday to sometime yesterday, and it seems to be doing that kind of silly stuff again. So I don't know what's happened here. Anyway, I'll see if I can find the video and we'll go from there. But I appreciate you guys being on here today. I don't know if there are any comments or questions, so I'll just wrap it up. Thanks for being here today, and I hope to see you back here tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Have a good day.